Good morning, everybody. Good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. But thank you for joining us for this week's edition of the ZECO Weekly Wednesday webinar. My name is Matthew Rendell. I'll be the moderator for this session. I'll be joined by partners from our Laos office, Myanmar office, Thailand, and Vietnam. By way of background, I'm a partner in Soxaparan and Associates with the Cambodia office of the ZECO Law Network. What we'll be looking at in this session is each of the five countries in the Mekong region, we're sort of easing the restrictions now, slowly coming out of lockdown. So what we thought we would look at is, from our clients' perspective, from businesses in our countries, what will happen next as they sort of re-engage, as they ramp business back up and try to get back to business as normal. So we'll be joined with Cecil from our Laos office, and Kevin from Vietnam will be telling us about what their perspectives are from businesses in those countries. Geraldine over in Myanmar, and Achari in Thailand. So I think in terms of structure, what I will do is I'll give a brief introduction of the country I work in, which is Cambodia, and then I'll just give everybody about sort of 5 minutes or so to explain the situation in their respective countries. We'll leave a session at the end for questions that come along, either from viewers or myself or any of the participants. So that should take us to about the hour mark. On the question side of things, the way we'll do this, if you want to pose questions, do so using the Q&A feature. There's time constraints. We may not be able to get to them all. We'll get to as many as we can, but leave your name, your company, your email address. So if we can't get to your question, then we'll certainly respond after the webinar by way of email. So what I will do is I'll start just by explaining the Cambodia situation. Cambodia has been fairly fortunate in terms of the infections. We've had about 122 infections all up. There's been no deaths, which is very good news. I think now there's maybe one active case, if any. So in terms of health situation, we've done quite well. But of course, business-wise, we've been impacted heavily, like most other countries in the world. What I want to do, we've only got sort of 4 or 5 minutes. So what I want to do is just focus on a couple of the sectors which are the biggest contributors to our GDP, and just look at the legal aspects of things they may do as they start to come back to ramping businesses back up again. In Cambodia, those sectors are the garment sector, which employs at any given time around 700,000 to maybe 1 million workers. A country of 15 million, that's very, very significant. By far and away our biggest private sector employer. The other sector is the tourism sector, so the hotel sector. The garment sector, of course, was impacted almost instantly because our supply chain issues out of China. So once the supply chains got impacted, a lot of those factories had to close business. What I've heard from the Garment Manufacturers Association is something like 30% have closed business. The rest have reduced operations quite significantly. So the big issues right there, of course, were how to deal with the staffing, the termination when you get impacted, when you have to close business so quickly. What occurred was the unions and the employers came together quite readily, actually, and sort of came to some agreement as to how they would handle this. So I think going forward, what we're going to see as we come back into recovery and those factories start to ramp up operations again, I think the issue here will be looking at collective bargain agreements to make sure they address in case this happens again in the future. I mean, there could well be a second wave, there could be another virus in the future. So I think in terms of the collective bargain agreements, this was never addressed. The law doesn't address the situation. So I think what I expect to see is a lot of work around redoing employment contracts, re-looking at employment contracts for rehires and collective bargain agreements. The other issue, of course, is the supply chain itself. I mean, that clearly, I think, will have to be diversified to best they can. A lot of our factories were relying upon one country as its sole source. I think that will certainly have to change going forward. So supply chain diversification. The other issue I see is rental properties, actually rental contracts. Most of our garment sector employee and the garment sector factories were they're foreign investors, so they're all renting properties. And again, this pandemic, this virus didn't really factor into the existing force majeure situation. So the government didn't come in with provisions to deal with this, so it was left up to the lessors or lessees to find some kind of solution themselves. So what I expect going forward is there will be a real look at some of these rental contracts as businesses start up again. I think it's similar things in the tourism sector. The tourism sector is, the hotel sector is decimated because it relies on the cessation of international travel went from high occupancy to single-digit occupancy, in some cases no occupancy. So that, of course, impacted instantly on employment situations. So Cambodia, we've got an unusual situation, well, not unusual, we've got a situation with employment contracts where there's basically two kinds. There's the fixed duration contract or there's the undetermined duration contract. Now, what happens on termination of those two contracts is radically different in terms of financial payout. So if you're on a fixed duration contract, if I'm a hotel and I'm hiring a manager on, say, a 2-year contract, this virus hits, I'm having to terminate him at the 6 month in, I still have to pay out the remaining 18 months of his contract. Whereas if the same situation, an undetermined duration contract, 6 months comes along, I have to terminate. All I'm having to pay is 2 weeks for every year of service. So in this case, I'll probably have to pay 1 week's salary. So there's a dramatic difference in terms of how you handle situations depending on contracts. So I expect to see in employment situations in hotels, there'll be a real look at, or maybe they'll go to their lawyers and say, look, how can we, as we rehire people, how can we look at these contracts? What's the best kind of employment contract we have? Because this is a new normal, could become a new normal. The other thing I think with tourism, again, the rental issue is a big thing. The hotel management agreements never accommodated this. How do we redesign, reword some of those clauses in rental contracts? I expect to see a fair bit of that sort of work being undertaken. I think the other thing for the tourism sector is I think they may well start to maybe try to develop more of a domestic market. They've been almost completely, well, very heavily reliant upon international tourists. So I think we may see a move towards maybe promotion marketing to try and capture more of a domestic market, enhance more of a domestic market. So if this happens again, at least they'll have a domestic market to maybe sustain them a little bit as they go through the cessation of international travelers. Because in Cambodia, whereas we blocked international travel, there was still free movement within the country. So I think there's still a domestic market to be had. I expect to see tourism maybe look towards developing that. The other sectors, just private schools, I think are very interesting. Private schools, it's a big business in a country like Cambodia, and it's an expensive business to operate. And of course, that was one sector that was impacted by government directive. So they were told to close and everybody had to move to home learning. I think going forward, what we will see in that sector is maybe they're going to have to really enhance to see how well they can develop home learning processes in case it's needed to go in the future. Because if I'm a parent and I'm moving to a place like Cambodia or any foreign country, you're putting your kid in private school, you're now going to be going to those schools as you're choosing which one. So, well, look, what do you do if this happens again? How well are you set up to deal with home learning? Because I don't want my child's education disrupted. So in the private sector, I think there's going to be quite a lot of work around being able to seamlessly move to home learning again if it's required. I think other sectors like the banking sector, professional service providers, you know, this work from home scenario, which has become necessary in some countries, others by choice to varying degrees. I think going forward, that's something I expect to see probably continuing on to a degree. We'll need to look at how you monitor that, how you supervise that. So is that technology, is that certain standard operating procedures? But in those sectors, we expect to see a lot of movement towards maybe maintaining that to a degree, but certainly being able to quickly pivot to that if need be in the future. Very, very important for banks, for example. I mean, they have to have business continuity plans through the regulators, and if they are caught in a situation where they're forced by law to have people work from home, they need to be able to pivot very quickly. So I see sort of around what's happening going forward as sort of those main things. I think people will be re-looking at employment contracts, maybe collective bargain agreements with unions. Supply chains will certainly be re-looked at, diversified. The developing domestic markets, certainly in the tourism sector, maybe even other sectors that's relevant, and then just designing sort of seamless ways to pivot working from home for most professional service providers. So that's sort of what I see happening. I'm very cognizant of the timing, so I think I'll stop there for Cambodia, and maybe I'll move up to Cess in our Lao office, if she can give us some insight into what you see going on up there in Laos.
Hi, good morning. For Lao, we have the government has further eased restrictions, and the residents are now resuming daily activities under the new normal, as the country records no new COVID cases for more than 50 days, actually. So, and we are also been fortunate to have lower incidence of positive cases, with 19 cases recorded, 16 recovered, and 0 fatalities. So now business have mostly been allowed to resume operations here, including night markets and cinemas, the only exception being bars and beer shops. So businesses, construction projects, plants, and factories are now resuming operations following guidelines imposed by the National Task Force Committee on observing social distancing at least 1 meter, and the usual hygiene and safety precautions such as hand washing, installing hand washing stations, and wearing face masks. So as to travel and movement control, domestically, people are now allowed to travel between provinces without restriction. However, the international borders are still closed, and people are still forbidden from entering or exiting Laos, except with those with prior authorization or those driving cargo vehicles. So while the business has now resumed largely, residents are still cautioned to remain vigilant and to continue practicing social distancing and hygiene measures. And the government says that this easing of restrictions is temporary, as the government continues to monitor the situation. In case there is a new confirmed case in a province, stricter measures will be imposed in that locality. And if cluster cases are found in 2 or more provinces, then the government may again revert to stricter lockdown measures. To help businesses and the sectors affected by this crisis, the government has imposed temporary relief measures, especially for labor. They have allowed exemption for salary tax for employees up to 5 million Lao Kip, which is approximately $550 for 3 months. Similarly, micro enterprises have tax relief for 3 months, and compulsory social security contributions are postponed for 3 months for affected businesses. Specifically for the tourism sector, as the government has recognized that they are particularly impacted, there's also a postponement of a payment of tax for tourism business operators for 3 months starting April. So this tax relief measures are in effect until June. Similarly, social security regulations are being considered to provide labor greater relief in the face of pandemic, because admittedly there are some businesses that are suspending operations and reducing the workforce. So we also foresee situations very similar to Cambodia, where there would be employment issues, operations issues coming up. And specifically for contracts, a few contracts would be raising force majeure clauses in when there is like suspension or the difficulties in delivering the obligations under contracts. The Bank of Lao PDR, which is the central bank of Lao, has also recognized the difficulties and has implemented credit policy actions to assist the affected sectors of the economy. Specifically, it has reduced policy interest rate by 1% and has reduced the compulsory reserve funds for commercial banks. It has also issued specific credit policies directed to commercial banks and financial institutions for them to consider cutting interest rate and service charges for affected borrowers, delaying loan repayments for both the principal and interests, and restructuring debts if necessary for affected businesses, as well as providing additional funding if necessary for these borrowers. Electricity tariff rates have also been adjusted, and there is now one fixed rate for residential meters. And the government acknowledging that there is difficulty for smaller households, so low-income families will have a 15% discount for those having usage of less than 150 kilowatt hours. So essentially, the issues that face Laos are similar to the other countries. And now, when we were forced with the lockdown and limitations in in social interactions, this has forced Laos to adopt digital means of communication and doing business faster. So now we see businesses meetings conducted online, as well as more digital solutions for businesses. There are more online resellers now I am seeing. And even small noodle shops and rice shops have the food delivery logos now. So they have used this situation to as an opportunity to have a wider reach for other customers more than their immediate neighborhood now. So it's the same for online shops selling groceries now. While before the Lao has very limited sellers like this, the pandemic has urged businesses to rethink how they are going to service customers. So this, I think, is one shift that we noticed with the lockdown. And now continuing, while even now that the businesses have resumed operations. So I think for the summary, that's it for now.
Thank you. Actually, it's an interesting point you raise about people's readiness to re-engage. Say, so I mean, Laos was very lightly hit. There were very, very few infections, but despite that, you find that the people themselves feel safe in sort of going back to these cafes, going back to these restaurants, despite the fact you've had very limited infections anyway. Because an issue around the world I've been reading up is that at times there's government lockdowns of restaurants, so they've just barred people entering. But even when they lift those, there's a reticence for the general population to go back to for fear of getting infected. Given that Laos has had very few infections, do you find the people themselves are nervous about the virus, or not so much?
I think there is a certain amount of caution. They are not right now, because the infection rate is low. It's not very concerning specifically, but I think the people are aware, and that they have adopted means to, of course, protect themselves, and also still ensure that the business are ongoing. So I think it's a similar situation with other countries. Even if the rate is low, then it's still not safe until all this, there's a permanent solution that has been reached, or we see a vaccine coming.
So thanks for that. I'll move over to way over to the other side, over to Myanmar. Talk to Geraldine, and who heads our Yangon office. So I'll pass over to Geraldine to give us an insight into what's happening over there in Yangon.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. My name is Geraldine from our Yangon office. So similar to what we've heard from our colleagues in Cambodia and Laos, Myanmar actually has not had that many infections. I mean, we were also very fortunate that the government had taken very early measures to ensure that returning migrants, returning workers, airports were closed very early on, and to basically contain the spread of the virus. So to date, Myanmar has officially announced 224 cases thereabouts, of which there haven't been that many deaths. I don't have any exact numbers, but it is in that region. There are 200 plus cases. The reason I say this is because it's mostly still imported cases, and community-based infections have not really happened, which is why businesses have started to reopen. The state councillor has announced that schools, restaurants will also be allowed to reopen in the coming days. Whilst we say that infections have not really happened, we do see a trend where, of course, companies are remaining cautious. There are rules to follow. Social distancing and precautionary measures must be put into place at various factories and workplaces in a structure where since late April, the government actually announced that workplaces and factories have to close and go through an inspection process before they can officially reopen. The inspection process is designed to basically ensure that there are sufficient hygiene facilities, there is social distancing being observed, and things like that. So moving fast forward into now, we're in the early week of June. We have definitely seen that businesses are really starting to reopen. Traffic is very apparently much heavier on the roads than it was in sort of April and May. And really the focus of the government has actually been to kickstart the economy. Like most of the countries that have suffered the economic issues with the virus, what the government has done is basically unveiled a relief plan. So in Myanmar, this is called the COVID-19 Economic Relief Plan. The strategy of this is short to medium term goals, but it works towards affirming what Myanmar has already implemented in the past, which is a sustainable development plan. It's known locally as the MSDP. So this COVID-19 Economic Relief Plan supports those strategic goals, and perhaps I can just talk you through some of those items that the government has addressed that they would want to focus on. So firstly, it is to improve the macroeconomic environment through monetary stimulus, lower interest rates, lower the minimum reserves of banks. This is all designed to ensure there is sufficient liquidity going into the market. Banks have been given sort of a more relaxed requirement in terms of complying with their capital adequacy ratios, essentially to design it to ease the strains on the banking sector. For example, some of these deadlines that the banks were supposed to, just to give a bit of background, the banks previously in Myanmar had sort of been given a time period for compliance to bring them up to international standards in that sense. That has now been given a little bit of easing and a bit of leeway where they have been allowed to delay those deadlines for compliances, not saying that they are non-compliant in a manner that's not safe for the banking sector, but they are just basically given a little bit of leeway. So what else we have seen is that the government is increasing government spending. This has been reiterated by recently the Deputy Minister of Finance that they do want to increase government spending to spur the economy. They are doing how they are going about this is the government is providing low-cost funding and loans to the very affected businesses in the country, the micro, small SMEs, with focus similar to Cambodia on the garment sector. The garment sector is also one of the largest contributors here in Myanmar. And of course, the hotels and tourism sector have been given loans at very, very low interest rates, 1% of the interest rates. Another thing that has really come up that's quite interesting is basically microfinance institutions. Previously, before the virus hit, there has actually been a lot of MFIs that operate in Myanmar to sort of give access to funding to a lot of the population here who really is an unbanked. We're talking about very local grassroots micro loans. And what we've seen is a strain on the MFI sector because a lot of these borrowers have not been able to repay their loans. So what the government has done is they have actually instructed MFIs to allow delayed repayment, and on the flip side, also supporting MFIs by ensuring that these MFIs will have access to lower cost funding. So what we're seeing this trend is basically the government is trying to inject liquidity, increase government spending. That's from a financial and a monetary stimulus aspects. On the trade and the investment aspects, there has also been a commitment where they will expedite approval processes. I mean, we can see that regionally there is probably going to be a lot less investment capital that's going around, and certainly Myanmar continues to be one of those countries which try to secure such inbound FDI. This has been going on for a number of years, where they have been trying to streamline FDI processes, and we can see increasingly improved aspects of that by the creation of specialized ministries. They've now created also something very interesting called the Project Bank, which is actually a very transparent framework for PPP projects. So Myanmar has a big need for infrastructure development, and how they are doing this is they are actually creating a framework for PPP to happen in Myanmar. This has never happened before. They released this Project Bank in February of this year, so this is something that's very good. I always tell people who ask me, opportunities in Myanmar are there. I would say that whether the virus is happening or not on a sort of a higher level, it's business as usual. Life goes on. A lot of these infrastructure projects continue to be released, and investors have actually expressed interest. An example of this is a solar tender. In the last 1 or 2 weeks, Myanmar announced a solar tender of up to 30 project sites for installed capacity of 1,000 megawatts. This has generated a lot of interest. We are also ongoingly supporting some investors in this area, and it's really something that we think would assist the economy, because they need electricity for basically the industrialization of Myanmar. There's just a lot of factories have come in, and there's just not enough electricity. So electricity and energy is something that a sector that we've seen certainly is a focus for Myanmar. On the smaller level, we can say that there is actually now a promotion of international trade. What has happened is that they have lifted the import ban on alcohol. Foreign alcohol was not previously allowed to be imported in Myanmar, but I think to spur a little bit of trade in this area, what they've done is to actually allow alcohol to now be imported. Of course, easing impact on laborers. There is actually social benefits that have been given. These are all like similar to Cambodia. A lot of the garment, cosmetic tech sector have been affected by factory closures. So social security payments have been made up to 40% of their salaries. What we have seen also is the promotion of innovative products and platforms. This is also under the government's COVID-19 plan. Digitization, and just some keywords here, I'm running out of time, but basically digitization, use of mobile financial payments, this has really taken off in a huge way. Myanmar has very, very high unbanked population, 70% plus, based on 2019 numbers. So mobile financial payments and sort of the digital payments have really taken off in a really big way. We've seen some big movements here. And Financial recently invested 73 million into the largest financial services provider here in Myanmar, Wave Money. We've seen a strengthening of healthcare systems. Insurance has been given a boost. I mean, we've heard this story coming out of Myanmar in the last 1 or 2 years. The liberalization of the sector has happened. A lot of these foreign insurance companies have actually started operations, and we've seen that hopefully this would actually increase the take-up. There is a growing middle class of people in Myanmar, and they want better quality services, products, insurance being one of them. A lot of the market is being educated as to that now. Yes, so that's basically the 7 points that I've gone through as to the government's focus. Thank you, Matt. Back to you.
Thanks, Geraldine. It's an interesting point you raised there about the government sort of easing up on the bureaucracy and making the paperwork sort of less heavy in terms of processes and whatnot. Do you see this is a situation to remedy the immediate problem, but do you see this is sort of the way they will be continuing to operate going forward? Because it is somewhat restrictive in a way, Myanmar doing business because of that sort of old-fashioned, bureaucracy. So do you see this as something that they'll stay the course with this, even after this pandemic passes?
Sure. Thanks, Matt. Sure. So what has happened is actually it has been a trend to actually make Myanmar a lot more friendlier. They are really looking at they are doing business rankings. That is the I think it's the World Bank, right, that releases the doing business rankings every year. They have been going up progressively on the tables. what they're doing is they are actually streamlining a lot of laws to make the legal framework much friendlier for investors, to make, they like to use this word, one-stop service. So there are a lot of ministries now which are one-stop service. You go to one place and basically it streamlines the approval. This is the Myanmar Investment Commission in Myanmar. So yes, we've certainly seen that not just from a bureaucracy aspect, but the strengthening of the legal framework has really been designed to encourage a lot of economic activity. Some simple examples of this that I can give: very recently, the industrial zone law was passed on the 27th of May. Industrial zones account for about 31% of the GDP. There are actually about 60 industrial zones all over Myanmar, and of course, within these industrial zones, it is essentially export focused. They want companies to come and set up here, so as their export base. Geographically, Myanmar has good positions, being in between China and India, with access obviously to the Indian Ocean. It's close to ASEAN. It has relatively cheap labor, so there are many favorable points. But at the same time, there are also certain pain points. Electricity being one of them, unstable electricity being one of them, which is why in my earlier speech I mentioned that the solar tender is happening. It's really to actually encourage the whole ecosystem to sort of be very comprehensive in being able to support businesses. Yep. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks for that. It was quite an extensive answer. I was kind of looking for a yes/no answer. That's okay. Actually, since the importation of foreign alcohol, do you find that you're getting into the office later and later each morning now? Actually, you don't need to answer that question. Let's. I'll take it as a no. We'll move across to Thailand, Achari, to the neighbour of Myanmar, to hear what her insights are into what's going on there in Bangkok. Hi, Achari.
Hi, Matt. Thank you. For Thailand, now we are getting better and better in terms of the situation of the pandemic, because now we are in the third stage of easing the lockdown, and now most of business operations are getting back to business with their new norm of practice. For example, now gyms and spas are now can reopen, including a restaurant as well. And we are now have only a few number of people that are getting sick because of the pandemic. Okay, and in terms of government support for the pandemic, most of the policies, the governments, they try to help assist the business operator in terms of their liquidity issue. That's why the Bank of Thailand there comes out with the policies for the commercial bank to sit and then discuss with their customers whether there can be any opportunity for refinancing, for example, like for repayment extension or for the interest rate reduction. And also, other than that, the Thai government, they also approved an amount of soft loans to be issued to business operators, which mainly it focuses on SMEs who has been badly severe effect from the pandemic as well. And this soft loan is provided with quite a very low rate of interest, only 1%. And other than the initiative from the Bank of Thailand side, there is also the tax assistance as well. For example, there has been announcement of deferring the tax payment for both the personal income tax and corporate income tax, and also for those business operators who has obligations to submit their withholding tax. There is also an announcement that this withholding tax rate will be reduced as well. And now the government is also considering of reduce the tax on lands and buildings. And for business operators, of course, they are employers, right? And for the duties to contribute to the fund like Social Security Fund or the Provident Fund, there is also announcement that the contribution can be postponed to be later. And for the Provident Fund side, there is even the notification that the contribution can be temporarily suspended as well. And that's for the situations from the government side. And what about from the market side? I will discuss about a few sectors here, which now it has happened. Now, in the newspaper, we can see almost every day the news about Thai Airways, which now it's going under the rehabilitation process to help it to get back to the business. And what does this mean? It means that under the rehabilitation, it will be fall under the automatic stay, where no creditors can claim from Thai Airways temporarily, and also Thai Airways will not have to make any payment or to its creditors. But what will happen is that Thai Airways, they submit the plans to the creditor meeting to approve, and the plans will reflect maybe decrease of capital and increase of capital, or haircut, or repayment extension, or lower of interest rate. It can be any possibility, and then after that the plan will be managed by the plan administrator, and then will carry out so that Thai Airways can get back to its business. And this is also the one tools that the business operators can think of if it sees the potentials to get back into the business. But if they has a severely affected by liquidity issue, they may think of a rehabilitation process. Okay, and that's for the airway sector. And for hotel business, which we all know that it has been badly affected as well from the situation. There is one business operator. Actually, it is also a listed company in the stock exchange of Thailand, which now is decided to increase its capital to help solve the problem of liquidity. This business is called Mint. And its main business is to invest in the hotel project locally and broadly. So it's like, has been badly affected. So they decide to increase their capital or issue of bonds to help with the liquidity issue. And another sector that I see that is also badly affected from this situation is the real estate sector, where before the period of the pandemic, there are a lot of supplies already. And then when this situation turns out, so what many business operators, their plans to do is that they suspend their projects 2 or 3 years later. And there is even one business operator who announced that they will cancel their projects now, and then they will return all booking fees to the customer. And they even announcement that sale of the land plots, which is previously planned to establish the project over there, so to solve the problems of liquidity here. So this is also another news that we saw in Thailand. Yeah. And also other than that, for the sector that I think it has not much been severely affected is, for example, like for the consumer products. We can see that business operators in this sector, they decide to still continue its investment in the business. While for the sector like textile, garments, or fashion products, some of the business operators, they made a decision to downsize the business. And other than that, most business operators as an employer, I can see the trends that they are now considering of do the retrenchment or suspension of work, or even a salary reduction. Yeah, and that's for Thailand side.
Thank you. It's interesting to hear what you say about the reopening now of spas and restaurants and gyms, because as everybody knows, Thailand, it's one of the world's great tourist destinations. It's a massive part of your GDP. Did you see? I mean, I assume that with the restrictions on movement in and out of the country, that must have really impacted on the tourist sector. Do you see that's slowly starting to come back now, even this early on in the recovery phase?
They start to come back, and then they're getting back to business. Even if now Thailand for international flights, it is still banned to fly into Thailand. But now within the countries, it's all reopened. There is no restriction for traveling from province to province. And now they also try to open and then promote Thai people to travel into the country to help business operators to get back to the business. While still we still maintain the behavior of maintain social distancing and hygiene things.
Okay, so you see that the domestic tourism, though, is something that's it's still sort of the government's encouraging that, or people themselves are deliberately trying to frequent or move around the country to try and frequent those businesses. The other thing I think the advantage Thailand has is you have a lot of domestic manufacturing. So a lot of consumer products, certainly the ones that are here in Cambodia, a lot of these are manufactured in Thailand. So I suppose in a sense, the international, the supply chain disruptions, whatnot, did you see much of an impact on products in Thailand being impacted by that, on the consumables, et cetera, or was this basically the supply chain sufficient within Thailand that you could go on manufacturing and supplying at least local stores? Did you see much of a change in sort of what you could buy at the supermarkets or this, that, and the other during this pandemic?
I see that actually the business operator in this sector of consumer products, it can still like continue operating so very well, even it is still like in the period of pandemic, because the people is still needs to buy goods for their everyday life. But what I saw is that the trend is that they try to also to improve their online sale and to improve to implement the IT aspect to help their business to get better. But I think for consumer product sector it's like less affected by this situation.
Thanks for that. Actually, we'll move over to Kevin, who's based in our Ho Chi Minh office. We have two offices in Vietnam. We have one in Hanoi and one in Ho Chi Minh. And Kevin is based down at the Ho Chi Minh office. So I'll pass over to you, Kevin, to hear from the Vietnam perspective.
Thank you, Matthew. I'm Kevin Hawkins, and I'm coming to you from the Ho Chi Minh City office in Vietnam. Good morning, everyone. I think everyone is fairly well aware that the Vietnam government's response to the COVID-19 pandemic has garnered a lot of praise from other countries as well as the World Health Organization. Current statistics indicate that we have currently under 350 cases. Most of those have recovered. In terms of community spread, we have no community spread cases within the last 45 days. So now the focus is getting back to normal, getting business back to normal as well. And in that vein, I'd like to cover three areas today. First being government support and programs for that, as well as two, market trends and practices, and three, legal issues that have arisen and going forward will provide some issues in the near future. So starting first with the government support, Vietnam recently issued, the government issued a decree in response to this pandemic crisis. Resolution 84 specifies tasks and measures to remove difficulties for production and business in order to promote disbursement of public capital and ensures public safety and order in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, within that resolution, as well as other supporting legislation that's been issued recently, we provide a number of benefits and opportunities for businesses and citizens as well. In terms of the employee and employer assistance, there have been some programs that have been implemented in order to provide employees with both cash benefits and incentives, as well as both for employers and employees, the benefit of being able to take loans out at very low interest rates for short term in order to supplement their ongoing subsistence during this pandemic crisis. So with both assistance to employers and employees, there has also been a extension of the deadline for trade union fees, which will now be extended for 6 months as well. So that's also one of the financial supports there. In terms of the other businesses, what we looked at is a deferral of both the tax and land rental payments. So we've extended in Vietnam the deadlines for the payment of value-added tax, for corporate income tax, personal income tax, as well as land rental payments will be delayed and deferred for a period of 5 months. There's also been a proposal by the Ministry of Finance to further reduce the corporate income tax by an additional 30% as it applies to small and micro businesses during the course of the pandemic, and that will apply for all of 2020. We've also seen in the power sector the implementation of a power price reduction of 10% for businesses and productions which are affected by the pandemic, as well as the State Bank of Vietnam providing under a circular that it recently issued, directing its credit institutions and even foreign bank branches to restructure the repayment periods and also to reduce the interest rates and fees for clients and customers who are adversely affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. In addition to that, the resolution I mentioned earlier provides for a reduction in interest rates by 2% for both direct and indirect loans to small and medium-sized enterprises, and that's to be funded out of a small and medium development fund which the government has put in place. Moving on to market practices and trends, we have definitely seen in Vietnam an increased dependence, as the other countries have mentioned already, increased dependence on e-commerce and digital payments. As Vietnam's e-commerce is still growing, the pandemic has accelerated this shift. The COVID-19 pandemic introduced many traditional Vietnamese customers and consumers to the convenience of online shopping. There's been also a concomitant increase in cashless payments as consumers have now not only recognized the value of the speed of the transaction, but wanting less physical interaction in terms of the actual payment of cash in their hands, as well as even walking into any stores or storefront businesses. So there has been a move towards this increased dependence on e-commerce and digital payments. Also, as Matthew, you mentioned earlier, there is also an internal reorganizing of supply chains domestically as well. Note that the businesses in Vietnam were heavily reliant on sourcing inputs for their production from China. And there has been some discussions on reorganizing some of those to provide for a more diversification of those inputs for production in Vietnam and sourcing those inputs from other countries as well. So in terms of domestic reorganizing of supply chains, there's been a great deal of emphasis on that as well, as then moving on to the issue of international supply chains. Because what we've seen also, and this is not new, we saw a strategy for a China plus one strategy that included Vietnam very early on. Many large businesses were rethinking production and business strategies earlier in relation to the US-China trade war, which led to tax burdens and risks of supply interruptions, and it prompted them to reorganize that system. This pandemic has further increased that impetus to provide for a China plus one strategy, and we've seen that also in relation to recently the Japanese government, for instance, has decided to launch a $2.2 billion US package to support Japanese businesses to relocate important production out of China. And I believe Vietnam was well positioned to benefit from this kind of reorganization of international supply chains, both from Asia, US, and EU, especially in relation to the Vietnam's recent signings of the European Free Trade Agreement, as well as other bilateral trade agreements with those countries. If I move on to legal issues, the main important points here would be we've seen a lot of interest in reorganizing and restructuring of businesses in Vietnam. Now, this comes in many different ways. There have been many clients who are looking to take advantage of the situation for distressed assets in order to acquire certain businesses and business lines. There have been a lot of reorganization of businesses to diversify and demerge certain production lines that are not necessarily profitable or not in their core line of business. So as businesses seek to streamline and reduce their business lines, they also look to reduce employment and employee roles as well. So we have seen a lot of interest in trying to do retrenchment, deferral of payment of salaries, deferral of payment of bonuses, salary reductions, a lot of efforts and questions from clients in that regard, as well as moving forward, questions about, as you mentioned earlier, force majeure provisions and material adverse change clauses in contracts going forward, and how to better address the pandemic issues relating to business shutdowns, lockdowns, quarantines, and so forth in contracts moving forward. So I think for Vietnam, those are the main issues I wanted to cover today. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Kevin. I mean, certainly that's a big array of governmental measures that have put in place to address this pandemic. One thing you mentioned about the online shopping, when you're saying there's sort of an uptake in that by reason of COVID, but are you talking about people sort of using Alibaba and Amazon, or are you talking about domestic online shopping? Because that's probably a sector that if that becomes quite an attractive thing, that's probably a good thing for domestic players themselves to get into. So are there Vietnamese online shopping sort of equivalents of Amazon and Alibaba, or you're talking about the big international players?
Thank you for the question, Matthew. It's a combination of both. I mean, certainly an uptick in orders from Lazada, which has a more regional presence, but certainly also the Vietnam players in here would be Tiki, Sendo, and others, as well on the commercial and on product side. But we've also seen an uptick in the very local food delivery online measures as well. Chop Vietnam, for example, and other markets have set up their own online platforms in order to develop and encourage the delivery of food and food and produce items, where people will actually go out and shop for clients and customers and return back within an hour and do all the shopping for you. So definitely opportunities in this e-commerce sector moving forward, especially for Vietnam players.
Great, Kevin. Thanks. Thanks everybody for your contributions to this session. We've only got a few minutes left, and there's been a few questions come in. And one we tend to be getting time and again, and given that we're sort of a law firm that is dealing with international investors, so a lot of our clients are foreign investors coming into the country. A question I just want people to clarify this about the movement of foreigners within the country, so to speak. So if I'm coming in now to Vietnam or to Myanmar, and I want to look to, you know, I've got a deal of any kind, be it a property acquisition or something. Am I having to, is that doable even now? Do I have to come into the country? Do I have to quarantine for such extensive period of time that it's just not feasibly practical at this stage to take business trips? This is a question we're kind of getting in the Q&A. So if we can just clarify that point. From Cambodia's perspective, if you come in right now, you get tested on arrival, you stay one night in a government institution, waiting, or a hotel or government authorized place, awaiting the result of your test. If you come back positive, then you're put into some kind of government authorized institution for 14 days. Or if anybody on your plane tests positive, again, you're subject to mandatory confinement in a government institution of some kind. If you don't test positive, you're meant to quarantine at home for 14 days. And that basically negates any chance of doing any business trips at this stage. If we just go around the countries, Kevin, we'll go backwards to start with you. What's the situation there? If I'm a businessman and want to come in for 5 days.
Right. Currently in Vietnam, as I said earlier, there's a resolution to allow for the essential workers, for the foreign experts and enterprise managers to come back to work on projects right now. But even then, they would be subject to quarantine restrictions. There currently is no program in place for tourist market yet, but except for returning Vietnamese who are currently in countries coming back to Vietnam, the procedure remains the same. There will be testing in the airport, but there will also be a mandatory 14-day quarantine in a government facility before coming back into the population.
Actually, Thailand is the same. In Thailand, we cannot yet come in for business trips.
For Thailand, yeah, for flying into the country, since international flight is still banned, then there is no coming from to Thailand. But for the quarantine, yeah, actually for across the province within the Thailand, there is still a quarantine implementation here, which the travelers will be tested, and if the result is positive, then it will need to be quarantined in the state quarantine. Yeah, but if the result is negative, then it is needs to be quarantined by themselves. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Okay, and is that, just quickly, Geraldine, is that the same Myanmar and CES in Laos? It's still not possible really to do any short, quick trips?
Well, yes, for Myanmar, airports are still closed till the 15th of June, but we expect that may reopen. The government on the 28th of May just recently announced some measures. It's going to be a total of 21 days of quarantine. What this means is 7 days. They want you to show evidence that you quarantined yourself for 7 days in your home country. When you come back, it's 7 days at the Myanmar government facility and another 7 days at home thereafter. you also have to show that you're COVID-free. When you come in, you have to actually adduce evidence of a test having been conducted. So, well, there are challenges, but it's possible for people who really want to come back in that sense.
Okay, and Seth's the same? Or?
It's essentially the same. Entry and exit is still prohibited, except for some exceptions, such as experts, which has prior authorization from the National Task Force Committee. And these people coming in, also allowed returnees are allowed, but everyone has to have a 14-day quarantine that's mandatory, as well as a COVID check.
So effectively at this stage, I think sort of you're coming in to do business excursions. It's not really feasible for any of the countries. I just want to, we've only got a couple of minutes left. I just want to, I mean, we're talking about going forward and changes that businesses will probably need to make. What do we see as sort of a lasting, they need to change to accommodate the current situation, but of those changes, what do we see will be an ongoing, lasting, sort of permanent change from each of the countries? If we start with Kevin, we'll go back to you. We'll start with you. What do you see of these changes that have been forced upon people? Are any do you see likely to stick around? You spoke about sort of online shopping, for example.
Right. Oh, I thank you, Matt. I think there has been a fundamental change, as you say, in both the behaviors and of Vietnamese people generally, in terms of both the and e-commerce, digital payments, online shopping. That has moved and progressed that sector leapfrogged much further than it would have normally done at a regular pace of advancement. So that has pushed that to the forefront. In addition to that, you're going to see a lot of the focus on Vietnam tourism as well, as we really start to increase and promote Vietnam domestic tourism. While we can't have foreign tourists coming into the country right now, you see a lot of programs, both from hotels and airlines, in terms of promotions of domestic places and travel for Vietnamese citizens. So that also could impact the tourism sector going forward as well, in terms of that.
In Thailand, what do we see as actually any sort of permanent changes you think as a result of this?
Okay, for permanent change, I think it would be behaviors of people in the society, especially like for consumer behaviors, because during this period we use a lot online shopping or like, you know, food delivery services, and people get used to it more and more because of this COVID-19. And also other than that, for office workers, maybe like us or in other industry, they also practice the work from home a lot, and some company also extends the period till like the end of this year. And I think this will become like you know, the new normal, that without the pandemic we can still like, you know, continue to practice like this. And also people, especially for the hygienic issue, there are increase of awareness of people in the society, and they practice social distancing a lot as well. I think this will be the permanent change that we'll see in the Thai society here. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think that's going to be common around the world, this idea of working from home, but also people washing hands. I mean, what a great positive, you know, thing that comes out of this. If people continue on with that, you know, the other, particularly in some of the countries, less diseases all around, etc., very positive. Geraldine, over in Myanmar, I assume you're going to tell us that foreign alcohol, that's going to be a permanent, you'll be enjoying that from here on in, or?
Yeah, I mean, yes, sorry. Yes. Sorry, I think there was this is just a slight lag there. Yes, I mean, it's the same in Myanmar with the digitization, e-money. People are going to be reliant on that. Well, of course, certainly, like I said, what we've seen is the middle class. People want better products. So that is something that's been happening in Myanmar, and I think that's going to continue to stay, and it's going to make it easier when they can actually buy things online. Yep. Healthcare. We think that healthcare is certainly on the trajectory of the up and up. This has been happening in Myanmar, but this is also here to stay because of the COVID. I think a lot of people have realized how important that is locally. Thank you.
Great, thanks for that. And in Laos? Jess?
I think it's very similar. Laos has been slower in adopting digitalization, e-commerce, but this has hastened the adoption of people to e-commerce technology. And then, of course, there's been a mind shift on the way people work, lifestyle, and I think this will be something that we will see for the longer term, not just during COVID restrictions imposed by governments. Businesses, I think, has also started to pivot to address the new realities brought about by this pandemic, and maybe focusing more on contingency planning for their businesses and liquidity and finances, because we don't know if second waves will come or third waves for this pandemic. So I think that's very similar for globally and regionally.
Yeah, thanks. Look, we're out of time, so I'll wrap up here. There were a few more questions actually. We'll get back to those of you that posted questions by email. There were a couple around, are there going to be sort of market entry changes permanent in the laws as a result of this? So we'll get back to those of you that posted questions, and unfortunately we were unable time-wise to respond to. But I'd like to thank all my fellow panelists for joining today. It was a real pleasure hearing from what it's like in other countries. I mean, in our region, the Mekong, we're very interconnected. It's very important for us to know sort of what's going on in our neighboring countries. We share clients, investors, cross-border investment, very common for us. So what impacts on one country, what happens in one country certainly has an impact on all of us. So it's very nice to hear, very good to hear what's going on in the other countries. Thanks everybody who joined the webinar today. It was a real pleasure having you, and there will be a recording of this webinar for those of you who want to take it and show your grandkids. You can get it we can email it out to you, or you can get it on our website. The next webinar, I'm told here, next Wednesday, is to do with, it's an IP webinar, online counterfeiting through ASEAN. So for those of you that are subscribed to our mailing list, you're receiving an invitation to that one. Otherwise, certainly go to our website and sign up for that one. That's on, I assume, the same time next Wednesday. So once again, thank you for the panelists. Thank you for everybody joining, and have a good rest of the day. Thank you.